So this is a quick video tutorial on literary argumentation, or basically how to construct an argumentative essay for this class. Before we start, I would recommend that you have read the handout on developing a literary critical argument that I passed out on class or that is available on my courses. I think if you read this first, you'll have a sense of where we're going to go in this short tutorial, and you'll also have access to some of the examples that are specific to Shakespeare, specifically to Hamlet, that I've given in that guide. So if you haven't read that yet, I would recommend that you pause the tutorial and read that handout and then come back when you're ready. So now that you're back, or now that you're moving forward, let's just talk a little bit about what makes a critical analysis essay. This is probably material that you learned in English 258 or 259 if you've taken those courses, and it's material that builds on what all students should learn in English 101 and 102. That a critical analysis essay really has three parts. It has to have an argument. What is my claim? What's the position that I'm going to be arguing? It needs textual evidence. That is, as literature students, we want to use details from the text to support your claim and make it persuasive. And then finally, analysis. This is close reading. How will I read the text? How will I point out certain features of figurative language and elements of poetic and dramatic form to demonstrate my argument persuasively? No one of these three elements can stand on its own. The satisfactory and persuasive critical analysis essay combines argument with evidence and with analysis. So you want to set forth a position, you want to glean and cull textual evidence that supports the position, and then you want to do something with that textual evidence. You want to, in effect, prepare close readings in your paper, just as we talk through close readings when we look at passages in detail during class. One of the parts of critical argumentation that can be the most difficult is getting started. And the introductory paragraph for this kind of essay needs to do more than simply provide an entertaining or captivating way into your topic. For our purposes, for the purposes of literary criticism, as the writer, you want to set forth your argument very clearly from the beginning, and you want to give your reader a sense of where that argument is going to go right in the first paragraph. So think of the thesis paragraph as a kind of built-in GPS system for your essay, that you're asking your reader to accompany you on an intellectual journey. When that reader decides to accompany you, you want to let that reader know straight out what it is you're going to be talking about, and then crucially, why that topic matters to our understanding of the play. That is, if you prepare to address metatheatricality in Measure for Measure, what is that kind of argument going to do for the reader's understanding of this play? What will it illuminate about the play, its characters, its themes, its historical contexts that the reader didn't know before? And once you've articulated that, you then want to outline for the reader what specifically you are going to do to make that claim persuasive. What are you going to focus on? Are you going to focus on a set of characters? Are you going to look at a set of related scenes? Are you going to examine Shakespeare's use of particular figures of speech? Whatever it is that you're going to do, and there's no right or wrong way to structure your essay, you want to outline that for your reader right at the start. So the thesis paragraph rehearses your overall argument. It should introduce the reader to the general direction of that argument so the reader knows where you're going. It should suggest why this argument matters to our understanding of the play. And it should preview how the paper is going to demonstrate the argument. And to do that, a thesis paragraph could be thought of as comprising three related parts: the what, the so what, and the how. That if the first paper of your essay can identify very clearly what it is that you're going to be talking about, why it matters to our understanding and appreciation of the play, and how you're going to go about making that argument persuasive, I think it's a successful paragraph. I also think it's a successful strategy for entering into any kind of discourse, even among your family and your friends. If you introduce a point, you suggest why it matters, and then you go about using textual analysis and close reading to defend it. So I just want to reiterate, if you're following along on the handout, the thesis paragraph combines the what, the so what, and the how into one cohesive whole. And those components together, roughly a sentence or two each, will make for the first paragraph of your essay. So what I'd like to do in the remaining part of the tutorial is just to take you through very briefly what each one of those three sections, the what, the so what, and the how, ought to do. And then we'll finish by saying a few general things about the body paragraphs in which you'll perform your analysis. The first part of the thesis paragraph is the what component, and this is the first step. It's sort of easy, especially since you've got a set of prompts at your hands for this first critical essay. When you get to writing your research essays or writing longer papers, you may be generating the argument yourself. But the what is simply an introduction in relatively broad terms of the general topic of your essay. So this essay for Shakespeare asks you to think either about conflicting models of interpretation in A Midsummer Night's Dream, or it asks you to think about the political motivations for metatheatricality in Measure for Measure. In some way, shape, or form, the what statement will reframe that topic, will reframe that question as a governing statement for your essay. And in doing so, you'll also identify the texts, Measure for Measure or A Midsummer Night's Dream, and the author, Shakespeare, that you're writing about. And let me just mention that Shakespeare writes plays. He doesn't write stories or novels or pieces or compositions. Please refer to the works as plays. So the what statement is the topic. And what I want to emphasize is that many students are disappointed when they write a C paper and they ask, why did I get a C and not a higher grade? And the reason 9 times out of 10 is that they stop at the what. That is, the entire paper becomes a reflection on an observation rather than a demonstration of an argumentative position or interpretation. So if you simply introduce a topic, metatheatricality or conflicting models of interpretation, and you don't say why it matters, what it illuminates, what it uncovers about a particular play, you're really setting yourself up to write a descriptive paper rather than an argumentative paper. And on that score, the highest grade you could possibly earn is something in the C range because it's the very basic level of analytical work. We want to go beyond the what. We want to go beyond simply saying that something is present in the play and start to think about why that matters. So after you introduce the general topic of your essay, you then want to think about why that topic matters to our understanding of the play. And then we get to the so what component. And the so what is the hardest to arrive at because you actually have to think pretty carefully about why this argument or interpretation matters to our understanding of the play. You don't necessarily have to make a huge universal claim, and you certainly don't want to simply suggest that this claim shows that Shakespeare's play was the greatest of all time, or that Shakespeare is an author, the most genius author that ever lived in Western history. These are congratulatory, qualitative, emotional claims. Shakespeare's been alive and well for over 400 years in the curriculum. He doesn't need our praise, but his works do need our attention and our thought and our analysis. So what you want to do is to think about what it is your reader is going to take away after agreeing to accompany you on this intellectual journey. What is it, for example, that metatheatricality does to illuminate the political conflict in Measure for Measure? How does an emphasis, how does our really focusing in on scenes of dramatization or themes of theatrical representation, instances when the Duke constructs a bed trick, for example, how does our attention paid to these scenes help us to think about the political motivations of the play and for whom? There can be multiple ways to address that question, but as the writer, you have to decide what the takeaway is. What is your reader going to understand about Measure for Measure and its politics for having focused on metatheatricality. So the key here is not simply to say that metatheatricality exists in Measure for Measure, or that A Midsummer Night's Dream presents us with two different ways to think about interpretation, the sort of cool reason literalism of Theseus set against Bottom's dreamlike interpretive fantasies, but you want to suggest why that matters. And it has to be more than simply saying it helps us to understand the play better, or it adds something interesting or illuminating to our appreciation of the play. You really have to think about what it is that you are trying to argue. You make the argument. You're in control of the argument. You get to say what it illuminates about the text and its context, what it helps us to understand about characters and their motivations, about the plots, themes, historical contexts, and/or critical problems that the play proposes. Another way to think about this is once you have established a topic, say metatheatricality or conflicting models of interpretation, what does that topic do to our understanding of the play? Not what is it or what does it look like, but what does it do? So once you've got the topic introduced, once you've suggested why it matters, you then come to the final part, which is the how. And that's where you will briefly present the sequence or the series of topics, terms, characters, or issues that this play is going to cover. This is the place where you can say, in this paper, I will focus on blank, blank, and blank. In this paper, I will look at these three scenes of metatheatricality. Or in this paper, I will first examine how Bottom treats the interpretation of texts, and then will contrast that position with Theseus's. Again, there's no right or wrong approach here, so long as you've identified very clearly what is going to follow when you get into your body paragraphs. So the idea here is, if you present something for consideration in the thesis paragraph, if you say that you're going to talk about metaphors, you should talk about metaphors somewhere in your paper. On the other hand, if you don't introduce something in the thesis paragraph, it would be a surprise to your reader if you went on and talked about it in your paper. So don't surprise your readers. This isn't a place to write suspense or mystery novels. Lay everything out at the beginning of the paper in the thesis paragraph so that I can follow point to point what your argument is, why it matters, and how you're going to go about discussing it. Remember, the thesis paragraph is the built-in GPS system for your paper. So lastly, just a few points about body paragraphs. Once you've set out the what, so what, how argument, the burden then falls on you to demonstrate or prove or illustrate this argument using textual evidence. So the textual evidence does not appear in the thesis paragraph. The textual evidence gets worked over and discussed and related back to your thesis in the body paragraphs. So this is the place, this is the bulk of your paper where you will demonstrate and develop your argument. But if you sort of step and look back now, you can see that because you've outlined the what, the so what, and the how in your paper, now when you go to write the body paragraphs, everything that you say about the text should link back to your argument. Every body paragraph and every bit of analysis should do something to convince your reader of the argument. So you can picture me sort of, whispering to you as you're writing the paper, I don't believe you, or I'm not persuaded, or can you give me another example, or can you read the text more intensely? You should always be trying to make the argument as strong as you can by making your evidence as convincing as it can be and your analysis as deep and as rich and as tied to the text as it can be. So again, you want to use specific textual evidence from the texts under consideration. You should quote words and key lines, and you should talk about them using the vocabulary of an English major. So simile, metaphor, tone, metonymy, soliloquy, and you should be practicing close reading as you have in your explications. So I would say, just as a general rule, as you're writing your papers and as you go back to revise them, if you find that your body paragraphs describe the text rather than quote specific lines and analyze the language, You probably want to go back and revisit that because your paper has lapsed into paraphrase. And paraphrase, talking around the text, telling me what's happening in the text, summarizing plot, all of that leads to a C paper. The kind of careful and strategic presentation of textual evidence and the thoughtful, close, critical reading thereof is what's going to get you to the A paper that everybody wants to write. Last points. Body paragraphs should be logically organized. I think they should follow the sequence of the items you lay out in the how statement. So if you say in the how statement you're going to talk about Isabella and then Angelo and then Duke Vincentio, I think the paper should unfold in that order. That keeps things logical and coherent. Paragraphs should transition effectively from one to the next, suggesting a logical progression in your thought. So you want to think about how the paragraphs not only relate to the thesis statement, but also how they relate to each other. How do all the cars in the train line up to get us where we're going? As a general rule, going back to English 101 and 102, paragraphs should generally focus on a single idea or a single part of a more complex idea. So if you find that you're on page 2 of a single paragraph, you've probably got too much in there than a single paragraph can handle. Think of a paragraph as a grocery bag. It can only hold so much. If you try to pack too much in, it's going to tear or it's going to rip and everything's going to fall out on the wet parking lot. So you only want to pack in so much. You can always use another paragraph, start another paragraph, use another bag so long as it's recyclable, and move forward. And of course, you want to move from paragraph to paragraph using a transition sentence, a sentence that signals where we've been and then gets us into where we're going. And if you want a simple way to think about transition sentences, think about them as exit ramps coming off the highway. If you're driving down 195, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. Don't be one of them. And you're ready to get off, exit 12A to get to UMass Dartmouth. You can't take that exit ramp at 75 miles an hour. You have to gradually slow. You also can't just slam on the brake. Someone's going to rear end you. So you have to gradually decelerate. You have to slow down from what you've been driving on the highway to what you will be driving on the local roads until you get off that exit ramp and then you can proceed to your destination. I think a transition sentence works the same way. You want to gradually move us from where you've been to where you're now going. And that sentence comes as the first sentence of the new paragraph, not as the last sentence of the previous paragraph. Lastly, you want to be sure to introduce quotations from the text into your paragraphs smoothly. Don't simply plop a line of quoted text into your paper. Don't finish a sentence and then plop in a quotation and then analyze it. Instead, offer some kind of introductory clause. So something as simple as Shakespeare writes, or in line 12, Hamlet says, or in lines 24 and 25, we see Angelo use a metaphor and then quote the text so that the paper has coherence and flow. And then lastly, I just want to mention something that I'm sure that you know, something that I'm not alone in suggesting that you do, which is to make sure you allot sufficient time for revising your essay. And as you write the essay, I would really stress that you look at the last paragraph that you write, the last paragraph which many people call the concluding paragraph. In so many essays that I read, the concluding paragraph actually states the argument better, more succinctly, more strongly, more clearly than a writer does in the thesis paragraph. And there's a reason for that you've now had the benefit of working through your analysis. You feel a sense of confidence in that last paragraph. Here's what I suggest you do. Take that last paragraph and compare it to the thesis paragraph and see which one lays out the what, the so what, and the how stronger. If indeed the concluding paragraph is stronger than your original thesis paragraph, swap them out and just make sure that the concluding paragraph has the what, the so what, and the how. In a short paper such as this one, you don't need a concluding paragraph that simply restates everything that you've done. Use that space to generate more effective analysis. And last point is that the so what could adapt and could change and become more nuanced over the process of writing your paper, which means that the so what statement that you began with might not be the so what statement that you end with. It might be that at the end of writing your paper, you want to re articulate your argument. And that's totally allowable. In fact, it's desirable. You should try to present the argument in the clearest, most convincing terms possible when you hand that final draft in. You want me to be persuaded right from the start that this is a worthy argument and it's going to do something to help me understand the play better than I do. So there it is, thesis paragraph, what, so, what, how. It's a wonderful thing to do to write this paragraph and bring it by office hours so we can talk about your argument at this level. I invite you to do that, and I'm very happy to help you. So that concludes the tutorial. Again, I would suggest that you go back and study the handout, maybe listen to this once more, and then come to office hours with the draft thesis paragraph if you'd like.